Scott Morrison says US President Donald Trump has shown restraint towards Iran as tensions between the two countries escalate following an oil strike. Prime Minister Scott Morrison spoke about the issue in Washington on the second day of his trip.
For more on this, we are joined live by Sky News political reporter and host of First Edition, Laura Jays. Laura, I heard your question at the back of the media scrum. You haven't had much sleep. It's been an extraordinary couple of days.
It certainly has, and look, it was a very formal occasion at the state dinner last night. This was an important statement about the status of the relationship between the United States and Australia. Here, that theme continued. I should say I'm at the Ambassador's residence, Joe Hockey, and you might be able to see me, the mateship symbol behind us once again. Today was a much more, less formal occasion, but still the same message coming through with a lot of business leaders, Scott Morrison, some senior US politicians as well, of course. But interestingly, we just spoke to Scott Morrison, the press pack that travels with him, asking some of those pertinent questions that really arose out of that Oval Office discussion yesterday, particularly on Iran. This was breaking news in the Oval Office, essentially, that the United States had put the toughest possible sanctions on Iran. And there was that warning, really, from Donald Trump that there is a nuclear option, and that is war. That is not something that he wants to do, and he said he's showing great restraint in doing that. We asked Scott Morrison about that again today, and he says that Donald Trump is very restrained in this area. So walking back and really allaying any concerns that Donald Trump is ready to go to war with Iran. This is what he had to say.
I made it very clear when we announced our involvement in that arrangement that it was very much about that freedom of navigation issue, and that's what it is about, and that's appreciated. There is an instinct towards restraint from the President, and I commended him for that.
So there you go. There was also a question about whether Australia would be asked to do more. That is not going to be the case. That Scott Morrison said there was a discussion. There wasn't a discussion, to be clear, about Australia doing any more in the Strait of Hormuz. We are involved as a coalition partner in the Strait of Hormuz to protect freedom of navigation. We haven't offered more, and no more will be asked of us. Now, Janie and Tim, there's some lighter issues as well, of course. It's not all about global affairs. China, we've spoken a lot about in the last 24 hours, but also space. Now, I know everyone gets excited about space, and Scott Morrison did go to NASA headquarters today. Of course, we have an Australian astronaut too, who's been much celebrated here in Washington, D.C. over the last 2 days. There's a partnership between NASA and Australia. This is all about boosting our new space headquarters that will be in South Australia. And the big long-term vision is to get some astronauts and a mission to the moon and set up kind of a base camp there, so eventually those astronauts can go to Mars. Now, there's no suggestion that an Australian astronaut will go, but certainly we would play some kind of role if our agencies do work together. Why is Scott Morrison committing all this money? This is what he had to say.
20,000 jobs in a $12 billion industry by 2030. That's why we're in it. And it has a great alignment, I think, with our other cooperation with the United States in other areas. So, and that's some of the discussions I've had around here this afternoon. I think it's seen very much as Australia understanding about where this is heading and positioning ourselves well to be part of what is going to be a very important and valuable supply chain.
So there you go, a very important supply chain, and space exploration often is the mother of invention too, so there's a little bit of that innovation aspect to it all. Now, there was a tree planting ceremony here at the Ambassador's residence. There's a lot of little activities going on. There's a lot of ceremony, if you like. There's been red carpets rolled out left, right and centre. That will continue as we travel to Ohio, Chicago, and then finally New York. But Scott Morrison spoke to a pretty friendly crowd here in a pretty relaxed reception, talking about his meeting with Donald Trump yesterday, and just said they're saying the same things.
In this visit, the President and I have been saying the same things. Our belief in free markets, our belief in the power of the individual, our belief in peace and in liberty, the rule of law, the things that have made the world the safe place that it is and has been since the end of the Second World War, and together we've been building that.
Laura, one of the things we are seeing with this Prime Minister, and he came into power obviously with a pretty strong mandate the way he won the election, is his brilliant ability to communicate. And we saw that yesterday, and he would have been under a deal of pressure, wouldn't he? Because that whole China issue is a delicate little walk.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think they see a lot of each other in one another, if you know what I mean. I think Donald Trump sees his election victory akin to Scott Morrison's. He was behind in the polls. No one expected Scott Morrison to win. And here he is, 6 months later in Washington, D.C., meeting the president. Yes, I think he was under pressure, but also he was pretty relaxed because he has spoken to Donald Trump before, and they do have a good rapport. And I can tell you from behind the scenes at the White House yesterday, Donald Trump, through his staff, was thrilled with the visit and how it had gone at the White House. And just to give you a little indication of why that was and what that resulted in was that it was a closed pool process. But then after the Oval Office meeting, after that ceremonial welcome in the morning, Donald Trump said, open it up to all the media. So anyone who had accreditation to the White House all of a sudden got to broadcast that live. So there you go.
It was very 2019, wasn't it? There's little question about that. And look, just to give a bit of perspective to those watching this morning that aren't sort of keen followers of international politics, this is pretty unprecedented for the Donald Trump presidency, isn't it? Like, he hasn't been speaking in these fond, affectionate terms with any other Western allies.
No, he hasn't really. It was vintage Donald Trump. It was part of his MO. Look, this is the second state dinner of his presidency, and that is significant. It's the grandest of grand gestures, as they keep on saying.